we are going to explore the so-called opposition rule. And this is the first video on the opposition rule. There will be a second and a third video on the opposition rule. And actually the opposition rule is kind of omnipresent in all pawn endgames that you are going to play. So here white should move, and this is obviously a draw. But the question is how black are going to make the draw. So let's focus on the black pieces. Now the first move of white is e2, e3. I mean, obviously they have to advance the pawn. They don't have a way of putting the king in front of the pawn, so this is a logical move. The question is, where should we move with the king? And the answer is basically we should follow the rules. First we move in front of the pawn, right? Somewhere in front of the pawn. But there is a certain line, which we're going to see later, after which we should move directly in front of the pawn, right? So we cannot move here or here. So see, now if we move here, it's not a huge deal, right? We'll see why. But later, if we move here or here, not directly in front of the pawn, there may be a problem. So if you remember one thing, you should remember that it's important for the king actually to move to the field which is on the column of the pawn, right? So we don't move the king here, we don't move the king here, we move the king here. Now, what should the white do? Well, obviously, if they move here, we just go and have the same position, right? So they should move somewhere with the king, and then we go back. So the obvious move in this case, and actually wherever they move, we're going to move in front of the pawn. That's more than clear. Now, best move for white is king d3, right there going forward. To everything else, absolutely everything else, wherever the king moves, we reply king e4, king e4, and we're done. I mean, not that we're done, but we go technically to the same position. Now king d3, king d3, this is actually the move. And what should be our move with the black pieces? Where should we move? And here comes the most important part in the so-called opposition rule. We should play in a way, and remember that, we should play in a way that whenever the white king arrives to the position to the left of the pawn or to the right of the pawn, we should put our king in front of the white king, right? So for example, if we have been here, now we cannot move our king here. But now that that's why we actually move directly in front of the pawn when we are going closer to the 8th rank, right? So now we have this opposition. We place it to the square opposite to the red king. Now, again, e4, pretty straightforward. To everything else, for example, this, we're going to reply king e4. a4 check, where should we move? Well, again, the best move is king e5. Now, only move for right is king e3. Where should we go? Well, again, we have this simple rule of just going backwards, right? We go backwards, king e6. What should white do? Well, king d4, one of the moves. Opposition rule, we place our king here. e5 check. Again, to everything else, like here, we reply king e5. e5 check, king e6. King e4, only move. What should we do? King e7. Now, king d5, what should we do? King d7. e6 check, king e7, king e5. Now, here is the most important bit. Again, we follow the simple rule and we play king e8, right? Now, king d6, simple, king d8, e7 check, king a8, king e6, draw. In this position, king f6, king f8, e7, king e8, king e6, draw. Now, what I was talking about earlier is in the initial position, when we go back, in the initial position here, if white moves e3, right? I told you we always follow this rule of going back directly in front of the pawn, but it's not a big deal if we play here, for example, right? Because what's gonna happen? King d3, right? We don't have the opposition. Well, we play king e5. That's totally fine. What's gonna happen? e4, we go king d6. We pretend we don't know this rule, the opposition rule. He goes here, right? Well, we play king e6, right? Same thing. Doesn't matter much. He goes here. What happens? We say, okay, I don't know the opposition rule. I just go somewhere in front of the pawn. I know that I should be in front of the pawn, so I don't go here, so I lose immediately. But I go somewhere in front of the pawn. King f7. Perfect. King d5. Well, I just know that I should not go back without being forced to. So king e7, e6. And here is the trick. Now, the pawn has reached the 6th rank. Here is where it matters actually where we are going with our king. So now, what the opposition rule says? The opposition rule says, let me put it this way. When white move king d6, we should move king d8. When white moves king f6, we should move king f8. So now, if we move king e8, perfect. King d6, king d8, e7, king a8, king e6. Draw. Amazing. But king e8, in this position, again, king e8 is the best move. What should we actually play? Is king e8. But if we don't know, again, the simple rule, when white moves king d6, we should move king d8. When white moves king f6, we should move king f8. If we don't know that rule, we may play a move which is not king e8, but it's king d8, right? We don't follow the opposition rule. So see, the opposition rule matters and it gives you a draw. In general, it gives you a draw if you follow it. But you may achieve a draw without following fully the opposition rule before the white pawn reaches the 6th rank. After it reaches the 6th rank, it starts mattering. And actually, 6th rank is very important in pawn endgames and is very important in rook endgames. So whenever you have a pawn and a rook endgame, which is a rook and a pawn against rook, which is a king and a pawn against a king, you should think about, has the pawn of my opponent, if I'm defending, has the pawn of my opponent reached 6th rank, and important things start happening at that point.